Welcome back, focused learners, to another explainer. Today, we're putting on our neuroscience educator hats to tackle something incredibly pervasive, utterly exhausting, and honestly, completely misunderstood. If you've ever felt like your brain is just this runaway train of overthinking, I want you to hear this right now. You are not broken. Your lived experience of chronic overthinking, especially if you happen to identify as a highly sensitive individual, is definitely not a character flaw. It's a neurological pattern. And the really beautiful thing about neurological patterns? Well, once we understand them, we can actually rewire them.
So let's dive right in with a clear roadmap of what we're covering today. We'll start with the infamous 3 a.m. overthinking spiral, and then take a look inside the highly sensitive brain. From there, we'll explore the paradox of thought suppression, learn exactly how to rewire the rumination loop, break cycles of isolation, and finally, we're going to reframe that sensitivity as your superpower.
All right, Section 1, the 3 a.m. spiral, where overthinking begins.
We really have to start by acknowledging the heavy toll of meta-anxiety. You know that feeling, right? Being anxious about being anxious? Picture this. It's 3 a.m. Are you awake? You're not up because you heard a loud noise outside. No, you're up because you are obsessively replaying a totally mundane conversation from like Tuesday. Your heart rate is slightly up, your shoulders are tense. This is a universally relatable late-night rumination spiral. In fact, over 73% of people experience this regularly. But for highly sensitive people, that number is even higher. At 3 a.m., your nervous system is literally operating under the impression that an awkward social interaction is a life or death threat to your survival.
Now, when this happens, our very first instinct is usually to just try and force the thoughts away. But thought suppression is exactly like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You push it down with all your might, you're expending massive amounts of energy, only for it to violently burst right back to the surface. Trying to force stop your thoughts, it only creates resistance. You simply cannot aggressively manage your mind into submission.
Moving on to Section 2, the sensitive brain, deeper processing. To really understand why that beach ball keeps popping back up, we need to look at the objective neuroscience. Roughly 15 to 20% of the population are what psychologists call highly sensitive persons, or HSPs. If this sounds like you, it means your brain's sensory gating is actually weaker. You let in way more stimuli and you process that information so much more deeply. It's this incredibly unique intersection of deeper processing and anxiety. Think of the HSP brain as a tremendously powerful modern supercomputer, but one that's inexplicably forced to run outdated Stone Age survival software. It sees threats everywhere simply because it's processing absolutely everything.
Now, let's talk about the default mode network, or the DMN. You can think of this network as your mind's story-generating machine. When you're actively focused on an external task, your task-positive network anchors you. But at 3 a.m., when you're completely unanchored to any task, the DMN just runs wild. And for highly sensitive people, it feeds ravenously on your capacity for deep processing, weaving these massive, sprawling, anxiety-inducing narratives out of tiny, insignificant details.
And this exact timeline brilliantly illustrates the neurobiology of feeling trapped in what we call the rumination loop. It happens so fast. Millisecond 1, the DMN generates a narrative. Millisecond 2, your insula registers physical tension in your body. Millisecond 3, your amygdala, which is basically the brain's threat detector, flags this feeling as a massive danger. And by millisecond 4, your logical, rational prefrontal cortex goes completely dark. You literally lose access to logic in less than a second.
Which brings us to Section 3, the suppression paradox, the ironic rebound. Let's look at the totally counterintuitive traps we fall into when our logical brain goes dark. It's known as the ironic rebound effect. There's this classic psychological study where participants were told, "Do not think of white bears." And of course, instantly, white bears were literally all they could think about. Why does this happen? Well, to suppress a thought, your brain first has to activate the exact neural pathway of that thought just to identify it, which ironically reinforces it. You end up completely exhausting your cognitive resources, and the thoughts actually get stronger.
So, the absolutely crucial point here is understanding the neurological difference between thinking and being caught in thoughts. Thinking is an active, goal-directed process. Being caught in thoughts? That means you're just a passive audience member held hostage by a dominant default mode network. The secret weapon here is a technique called cognitive diffusion. You want to recognize and label the experience. So try saying, "I am having an anxious thought," rather than saying, "I am anxious." It sounds small, but that tiny shift in language actually recruits your prefrontal cortex right back online.
Okay, Section 4, rewiring rumination with science-backed tools.
We really want to start working with your neurobiology instead of constantly fighting against it. So here is a simple, highly effective 3-step daily grounding routine. Step 1, label the thought pattern. Literally say, there's the 3 a.m. worry spiral. Step 2 is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory scan. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. And step 3, basic breath awareness. This specific sequence of sensory grounding acts like a neurological circuit breaker. It aggressively pulls your attention away from that internal rumination and anchors it firmly back into external reality.
Another incredibly powerful tool is the 15-minute behavioral activation schedule. You see, overthinking makes us want to withdraw, right? But withdrawing just gives us more time to overthink. To break this, identify an activity you value, schedule it non-negotiably, and engage for just 15 minutes. It could be a quick walk, reading a book, a hobby, anything. This simple, structured schedule activates your brain's reward circuits and physically breaks that vicious cycle of anxiety and behavioral withdrawal.
Let's look at Section 5, Breaking Isolation, Healing with Connection.
There is this deep, really profound connection between chronic overthinking and isolation. Often, especially for sensitive individuals, overthinking is actually just perfectionism wearing an excellent disguise. Driven by a hyperactive, evaluative system in the medial prefrontal cortex, you might find yourself constantly comparing yourself against these insanely rigid standards, endlessly scanning for failures and generating massive lists of shoulds. Ultimately, this just pushes you to retreat into your inner world. You withdraw simply to avoid processing any more sensory or emotional stimuli.
When you catch yourself stuck in that perfectionist trap, I want you to ask yourself a really crucial question. Is this actually your standard or an inherited one? Actively asking this question forces your prefrontal cortex to do a reality check. You can drastically decrease perfectionist overthinking by deliberately aiming for good enough rather than perfect. Honestly, good enough is a superpower because it finally gives your exhausted brain permission to stop evaluating everything.
To further break out of that isolation, we have to leverage social support. Genuine connection fundamentally calms the threat detection system and quiets the default mode network down. Find your highly sensitive community. Choose to be vulnerable rather than perfect with them. And if open-ended socializing feels way too overwhelming, use structured connection instead, like taking a class or joining a club. Also, never underestimate the calming vagus nerve activation you get from connecting with nature and animals. It's a game changer.
And finally, Section 6, Sensitivity Superpower, an evolutionary gift.
I really want to frame the highly sensitive mind not as a bug in the system, but as a profound evolutionary advantage. One of the absolute biggest shifts you can make is moving from self-criticism to self-compassion. When you're self-critical, you are literally activating your amygdala's threat response. Your brain thinks you are attacking yourself. But self-compassion, that activates your insula's empathy circuits and regulates your stress response. Shifting your internal narrative doesn't just feel better emotionally, it physically alters and rewires the actual biological structure of your brain.
And this all happens through neuroplasticity. Think of your brain like a dense forest. Rumination is this deep, well-worn dirt path. It's super easy to walk down because you've done it a million times. Grounding and self-compassion? That's like trying to hack a brand new path right through thick brush. It is really hard at first. But neuroplasticity means that every single time you consciously disengage from rumination and choose that new path, you are physically rewiring your brain, making the new, healthier connection stronger and much easier to access next time.
When we finally step off that rumination path, we can start to see our sensitivity for what it really is. Intense sensory input isn't a burden. It is the raw fuel that powers your default mode network into a profound creative engine. This deeper processing capacity is exactly what unlocks deep empathy, breathtaking art, and incredibly imaginative problem solving. It's the exact same brain network, just anchored in purpose rather than fear.
I want to let this final quote really sink in for a second. Your overthinking brain is not broken. Sensitivity is an evolutionary gift, not a personal failure. You notice things that others completely miss. You feel things with this beautiful, rich acuity. The goal of everything we've talked about today is not to somehow turn you into someone else. The goal is to free your natural, incredible strengths from the prison of rumination. So I'm going to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. What is one small thing you're going to do differently this week? Maybe it's trying out that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 sensory scan the next time you feel a spiral coming on. Or maybe it's scheduling just 15 non-negotiable minutes of an activity you actually love. You have the tools now, you understand the science, and your brain is beautifully equipped to rewire itself. Take that single step today toward a quieter, more vibrant mind. Thanks so much for learning with me, and I'll see you in the next explainer.